You're about to start watching The Spectator's post-budget briefing. Stephanie Flanders, Michael Gove, Tim Shipman, Michael Simmons and John Porteous will be giving you an insider's take on the autumn budget just hours after it's announced. The first 15 minutes of this event are free to watch here on our YouTube channel, but this live stream is exclusively for Spectator magazine subscribers. So you will need to head to spectator.co.uk/live to subscribe and view the rest.
Stanley, Wealth Managers, live from the Emmanuel Centre in London. Please welcome to the stage the editor of The Spectator and your host for this evening, Michael Gove.
Jonathan, thank you to our sponsors, Charles Stanley, and thank you to you for making it here to the Emmanuel Centre on this freezing evening. But it's worth it, because I have an exclusive Office for Budget for Responsibility report. They're like gold dust. But even though we've had hours to digest just what's in this, and also what's in the red book that accompanies it, you won't get a better analysis of every detail, every line, and every ramification than from our guests this evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome to the stage The Spectator's economics editor, Michael Simmons, our political editor, Tim Shipman, John Porteous of Charles Stanley, and Stephanie Flanders, the head of politics and economy at Bloomberg. As Jonathan indicated earlier, we're going to hear first of all from Michael, the man who knows more about markets than anyone in this country, our very own Adam Smith of the 21st century. Michael will be taking us through some of the headline facts. Those of you who are regular Spectator readers, as well as enjoying Michael's journalism in print, will also know that his podcast, Reality Check, is the principal source of, how can I put this, verified truth in broadcasting in Britain at the moment. So Michael will take us through those headline figures, through the jungle of statistics. And then I will turn to Stephanie, to John, and to Tim for their perspectives. We'll have a discussion here on stage, and then I'll throw it open to you for the questions that you want to ask us. So, Michael, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up so I can see my slides. We're all a bit distracted by the fact that we got given the entire budget an hour before we were meant to. So I need to memorize the slides slightly. But let's start with this first one, the market reaction. So this is the 10-year gilt yield. And the yield, when we made this graph, had come down. So that suggests that markets are actually pretty happy with what's in the budget. The reason they're happy with what's in the budget is because of the headroom. In all our coverage and everyone else's coverage in the run-up to the budget, we'd been saying, you know, there's this £20 billion black hole to fill, possibly £30 billion. That didn't materialize. In the end, it was only £6 billion. And we'll go into that a little later on. But on Labour's, thing they said they were going to solve when they came to be elected, and what they said was their main mission was growth. The OBR have been pretty clear today that they have failed miserably. The OBR upgrade growth, the red is today's forecast, and the blue is what they'd said at the spring statement. They upgrade growth for this year, but in every subsequent year of the forecast, growth is downgraded. So in the view of the independent OBR, Labour seems to be bad for growth. What we were all told just yesterday, the Chancellor's focus, cost of living, was going to be getting down inflation. Again, if you believe the OBR's forecasts, that seems to be wrong too. In this year and next year, they've upgraded their forecast for inflation. So the measures that Reeves has announced today, seem to be making inflation worse. But Reeves is in a funny position here, because obviously inflation going up is bad, it's the worst tax of all, but it's actually what's also helped to avoid this massive black hole. We'll get to this at the end of the slides. It was briefed before that the productivity downgrade wasn't as bad. As you'll see in a bit, the productivity downgrade was still abysmal. But what's actually happened is we've experienced so much inflation over the last few years that wages have grown faster than had been expected. And because we tax wages by so much already, it's kind of boosted receipts, which is why the gap was not too bad. However, when you look at all the measures today, the one that I care about the most, borrowing, because it's our debt interest payments, the fact that we're spending over twice what we spend on defense just paying our creditors, that's been revised upwards as well. So I'm sorry to say that's more bad news. But where is this money going? Well, for me, it's a benefits budget. There's increases to benefits across the board, especially on things like the state pension and other pensioner benefits. But this one is the health and disability benefit caseload. If you remember at the spring statement, they were going to cut just $5 billion off this, and at the time, that was to stop it going to 100. Well, instead of that, they've added an extra 9, and by 2030, it's going to hit 109 billion. And how is she paying for that? Tax rises. There's 26 billion pounds of tax rises today. 8 billion of that was by freezing the personal allowance thresholds. Cynically, Labour think that you guys won't notice this because she's not increased the rates, but you can see it pretty clearly on this chart. We used to say, the tax burden, that's tax as a share of GDP, is heading for an all-time high. It certainly is after today. But there's one big question, and I'm sure we'll get into this. Should we believe any of this budget at all? And this next graph tells me no. This one's slightly difficult to understand, but along the bottom, we've got the year of changes to be taking effect. And along the y-axis, you've got how much the changes are. And what you see is the blue line is spending, the red is tax. So the spending giveaways, those increases on benefits, are happening in the next few years. But the red line doesn't come up right until the end of the decade. So Reeves seems to have, I think, tricked the OBR into saying, yep, we're going to do this spending giveaway, which will pay for, around 2030. What's happening then? An election. So, does anyone believe that that's actually going to be delivered? And just finally, productivity. The tale, as I say, going into this budget was that she'd got this extra room to play with because the productivity downgrade was not so bad. The red line is where it's forecast to go today, and it's still pretty terrible. And I wanted this graph to be last because productivity growth, as well as our debt interest, are kind of the two things that are really undermining the British economy. And until we sort this out, we're going to just have, the constant threat of fiscal crisis hanging over us. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Michael. I'll turn, if I may, first to you, Stephanie. You've been in the markets in the course of your career. You now have an opportunity to observe them. As Michael pointed out, the market reaction today was stoical, if that's the right word. Do you think that was the right response? What's your own take?
So I think if you've been reading the Bloomberg headlines just over the sort of few minutes before the Chancellor stood up, there was a lot of whipsawing, market tremors, because they're obviously trying to absorb all the headlines coming out of this unexpectedly early OBR report. I think where they ended up makes a certain amount of sense, because some of the, certainly in retrospect, I think there was more fear that the Chancellor would really do the wrong thing and really err on the side of optimism than we might have expected. With all the lead up, I think there was an expectation, or at least there seemed to be priced into the market, really quite a bad budget. And so what we actually saw, where on the measure that many people in the markets would care most about, that headroom, the room for mistakes, the room for error, there was what they would consider to be good news. But I do feel it was a missed opportunity. I'm sure we'll talk about all the missed political opportunities and the difficult things you could have, the brave things you could have done if you were Chancellor, although they're brave things that previous Chancellors have not done either, like raising personal income tax hasn't happened for 50 years, the actual basic rate. But there was also an opportunity to get rid of some of that sort of premium or kind of extra cost that we're paying on our debt, which you can see even in some of the numbers in the budget. I mean, you're absolutely right, Michael, about the cost of the hanging over us of debt interest. If you reduce the interest rate that we're paying on our debt by a percentage point, which admittedly would be a lot, you gain £17 billion a year for the Treasury. You reduce the debt service by 17 billion. Now, she couldn't have done that, but I think if she had shown a willingness to take some pain up front, maybe on tax increases, maybe not giving in to the backbenchers on benefit spending, I think you could have shaved a significant amount off that interest rate, and that would have been actual real money for the Treasury. So I do think that was a missed market opportunity, in addition to probably all the political ones we'll talk about.
Thank you. John, obviously your clients and others will have been listening to your experts and you briefing them on the consequences for individuals and their financial plans during the course of the day. Was it the case that the phones were running red hot, or did people take the changes that Rachel Reeves announced very much in their stride?
So I think, Michael, you need to look at the run-up to this budget. I've never known concern amongst clients like it. There was fear that the pension system could completely change. Obviously, we talked about tax-free cash. There was great concern about what could happen to the property market. And there was really palpable fear that there would be a tangible misstep and the markets could collapse based on past experience. So at one level, there was almost a sigh of relief and thought, a sense of, well, this could have been an awful lot worse than that. My take on it was, looking back 12 months, last year's budget was a game changer for people thinking about retirement. It just changed everything, the way they think about that for private clients. And this year...
Because of inheritance tax.
Inheritance tax, yeah. And this year further increases that burden. So when I look at it together, what it doesn't take away is the fact that people have a cost of living issue, people are being asked to pay a higher burden, and long-term savings vehicles that really underpin that we as a society want to incentivize people to use, continue to drive uncertainty rather than comfort. And there are people that remain concerned that products, pensions would be a good example, will not perform in the way and give the outcome that they hope for, and why would they want to tie themselves up in that over the longer term? So that's really the discussions that we've been having to reassure people about that.
Tim, you've seen the number of chancellors who've delivered budgets in double figures. Admittedly, most of them were Tories. But looking at today, both as a piece of political theatre and as a piece of strategic positioning on the part of Rachel Reeves, will she feel that she's accomplished what she needed to?
Good evening, everybody. I don't know about the rest of you, but I need a stiff drink after today. This, we were told, was a budget for Labour values. Actually, it was a budget for Labour MPs. And in that sense, if we take that as the metric of whether Rachel Reeves will regard herself as successful, I think she probably will. Only a few months ago, she was violently resisting lifting the two-child benefit cap. Today, the main emotional centrepiece of her speech was her trying to persuade her fellow Labour MPs that she passionately cares about child poverty and that it's an absolute outrage that she and others have advocated the maintenance of the child benefit cap, which we should remember is wildly popular. This was a budget of choices, and those were choices designed to appeal to a party that has quite credibly talked about removing the Prime Minister in the months ahead. And that really is the context of what we've seen today. In almost all of the areas where they've made a political argument, we're going for growth. Well, it's damaged growth. We're tackling the cost of living. Well, the cost of the real household disposable income is instead of rising on average about 1%, which itself is absolutely risible, is now going to be rising at 0.25% by the end of this forecast period. So if you go back to that old adage of James Carville, Bill Clinton's main advisor, it's the economy, stupid, or Ronald Reagan's suggestion to voters, are you worse or better off than you were 4 years ago? A lot of people are going to be going into the 2029 general election unable to answer that positively, and that is a major issue for this government when it faces the electorate. But at the moment, it's facing its own backbenchers, and it will regard that as reasonably successful. There were big cheers in the chamber. But what you have to remember, almost everything we've been told about the budget in advance turned out to be fallacious. As Michael has already observed, the black hole was only about £6 billion. It was entirely possible to fill that gap and get your headroom without raising income tax at all. A lot of the other tinkering around the edges would have been fine. But Rachel Reeves made a decision that she wanted to drag effectively a quarter of all taxpayers into paying higher rate tax by the end of the decade. At the start of this decade, it was 15%. So that is a major incursion into the salaries of teachers and policemen and nurses and people like that who Labour normally would regard as its people. And Rachel Reeves was not that long ago saying, the clue's in the name, we're the Labour Party, we're not the party of benefits. Well, today, they are the benefits party. She's whacked it up by about £12 billion. And then try and examine how this government sells the political narrative that it's trying to sell to the public. Only last week, the Home Secretary was getting plaudits for a quite tough stance on migration, which is shared by 70–80% of the population, but by about 7 or 8% of Labour MPs. I'd probably name all 8 of them, actually. But what's happened today is that huge amounts of money in the child benefit thing is going to go towards foreign nationals who come here with large families. And Nick Timothy had some interesting figures on this earlier. I think it's 341,000 families who are from outside the UK will now be benefiting from that. If they think that is what the British public elected them to do, I suspect they're in for a rude shock. And if you look at the list of the beneficiaries of that, it is a classic case of Pakistan, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Somalia. It's those kind of countries. And the more that that seems to be the case, Labour mistakenly still thinks it's the party of the working class. Today it has proved that it isn't, and a lot of those voters are going to resist returning to the Labour Party. So there's quite a lot of fodder for reform in what's happened today. The other point I'd make before we move on is that the headroom, while it is a lot bigger than it used to be, is still a drop in the ocean. And the Tories are pretty annoyed that the OBR has refused to calculate the damage that will be done to that by the Workers' Rights Bill, which is still going through Parliament. So that will actually plug a decent amount of that headroom already. That will be wiped out by the fact that things are about to get more difficult to hire and fire. Firms will be taking on fewer people, and the employment figures are likely to get worse, along with inflation, along with the cost of living. So if Rachel Reeves thinks her and Keir Starmer keeping their jobs was her goal today, she has is a roaring success. If she was serious about creating growth or putting Labour in a better position to win the next general election, I think it's a big to use the classic Family Fortunes sound effects.
That is brilliantly done. I think Les Dennis will be looking to his laurels. Just one additional point, Tim, which reflects an exclusive that you've broken this afternoon on the Spectator website. When the spring statement was given by Rachel Reeves, she made a significant amount of national security and signalled increased spending for defence, among other things. But today, it appears, the defence chiefs are deeply concerned that the money that's been allocated won't be enough to meet the ambitions of the Strategic Defence and Security review. Can you say just a little bit more about what you've discovered about the rumblings within the services about the budget?
Yeah, well, so the government have committed to spend 5% of defence spending by 2030 on defence, of which 3.5% will be kind of what you and I would understand as defence spending, and the rest is kind of peripheral things that you can add onto the Christmas tree if you're feeling lucky that day. But the initial figure went up to 2.6%. And that was a decent injection of cash, but everybody who's been writing about defence for the last 6 months has been pointing out that there's a lot of programmes that are behind, delayed, over budget, and the sort of day-to-day spend of the MOD has already hoovered up all that extra stuff, and they're still short, and they're worrying about cuts. Now, the Chief of the Defence Staff and the 3 chiefs of the 3 armed services meet once a week. They had that meeting yesterday afternoon. At the end of which, they kicked out all their aides and all their civil servants, and they looked each other in the eye and said, we need to act as one here. And they are penning a letter for the Secretary of State for Defence explaining that they can no longer deliver his strategic defence review without more money. They can either deliver it with more cash more quickly, or they can deliver something that is denuded and will require some cuts to be made to kit and personnel. When I put this story up, most of the Ministry of Defence seemed unaware of what was happening in their own building. They got frantic and irate, and then later issued a statement that contradicted not one word of what I'd written, but said they were still trying very hard to meet their obligations. But there was not a penny of extra money for defence today. And bluntly, this looks like another thing that is going to eat into that headroom quite quickly, because Keir Starmer has made a big play of supporting Ukraine and putting Britain in a position to be a more meaningful contributor to European defence. And if all of your defence chiefs tell you that they can't do that, that's a pretty strong lobbying operation. And they're either going to have a blooming great row, or they're going to have to find some more money. The Treasury will dig in. They think the Ministry of Defence is profligate and useless. They're not necessarily wrong about that, but the people who sit atop it, of course, it's their lives that will be on the line if cuts have to be made. So that is yet another headache coming down the tracks, and I think until we wrote about it, I'm not even sure the Prime Minister was aware that it was coming down the tracks. Public service journalism.
Thank you. Michael, in the graphs that you showed earlier, one of the challenges that the country faces is growth in its delivery. Before the election, Labour said that they wouldn't need to raise taxes, or certainly not raise the headline rates, because their policies would generate growth. And one of the challenges, of course, that Rachel Reeves has had in the run-up to this budget is that the OBR have said that productivity in the economy is lower than might have been thought. To what extent, either today or in other measures that Rachel Reeves has introduced or is contemplating, can the growth picture be improved? To what extent were the measures either already in train or following on from today that really are about growth? And Stephanie, I'd love to have your perspective on that as well. But Michael.
It's hard to think of any, to be honest, because if you think back to that graph of the forecast for growth each year, apart from this year, for the rest of the forecast, they have it coming down. So that's partly global economic factors. And as Tim said earlier, things like the Employment Rights Bill, when that is eventually presumably passed and scored, is going to make things much worse. Since the Chancellor took office, we've lost over 100,000 payrolled jobs because of things like the £25 billion increase on employer national insurance, and also the increase in minimum wage, which has obviously been increased again. We're now in this funny situation where our minimum wage is actually one of the most generous in the world, but our productivity are among the lowest in the G7, and that sort of disconnect can't continue. I realize I've answered the complete opposite of your question and just found more negatives. There was one vague positive that the OBR put in where they said that there was, I think, a 0.2% benefit from the rollout of AI. But what's really striking is, maybe we should have included this graph, but there was another one where it had components of growth, and that essentially any growth there is comes from public sector spending. not from consumption or manufacturing. And that is not a long-term solution to anything. So I can't really find anything apart from that little AI point.
I can help.
That's it for the live stream here on YouTube, but we're still in full flow over at spectator.co.uk/live, where you can continue watching as a Spectator magazine subscriber. For just £3 for 3 months, your Spectator subscription includes full access to our website and app, along with a whole host of other benefits, like subscriber newsletters and, of course, our live stream broadcasts. So head over to spectator.co.uk/live to watch the rest. What are you still doing here? Go over to spectator.co.uk/live, where the Spectator and its panel are giving you everything you need to know after the budget. If you want to continue watching, head over there, spectator.co.uk/live, and you can rewind to exactly where you left off. This budget is one of the most consequential of recent times, and over at spectator.co.uk/live, you can join us and continue watching the discussion with Michael Gove, Michael Simmons, Tim Shipman, and John Porteous from Charles Stanley. Head over to spectator.co.uk/live, you can rewind and pick up exactly where you left off.